forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Deace. A little Christmas gift here from my oldest daughter, because somebody wearing a Michigan uniform has to be happy. My co-host Aaron McIntire here with me as well after a 2-week hiatus. Sorry about last week. The day job beckoned with the country falling apart, so I didn't get back to Iowa in time. Want to warn you now, we won't have an episode next week. That was always planned. I'm taking the family to Disney World. Unless you want to do it by yourself, Aaron, you're welcome to do that if you would like.
I think I speak for most people. Actually, you know what? Just to spite them all, I might do that. Just to spite everybody.
You should do that.
Yeah.
And just we'll have an empty seat here.
Yep.
Throw it over here to get a take from me.
Thanks, Steve. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
Thanks,
yes,
Steve.
Yes, thank you. Couldn't have said it better myself. He ain't the best color man in the business for nothing, folks. Well, with 2 weeks gone by here in our league, there is a ton of stuff to get to. I mean, we're going to do a big 5. We could have done a big 25 this week. There's so many things going on. But let's get to it as we always do, our big 5 on Bigger 10. And 2020, setting up as the year of the Upstart. We have not seen a season like this in our league early on, since like way back before either you and I were born. In 1967, Purdue, Minnesota, and Indiana tied for the Big Ten championship. Indiana went to the Rose Bowl and took on O.J. Simpson and USC in that game. Well, right now we are looking at Indiana has its first top 10 rating in the AP poll, Aaron, since September 22nd, 1969. That is more than a half a century ago. Northwestern is 3-0 in the Big Ten after being 1-8 last year. Maryland is coming off only its 3rd win over Penn State ever, and its biggest win by point differential against Penn State ever. And it's the first time Indiana, Purdue, and Northwestern are all undefeated in the league after week 1 at the same time. Keep in mind, this conference is more than a century old, and never, after week 1, have Purdue, Northwestern, and Indiana all been undefeated in the league at the same time. 2020, y'all, and you're seeing it at the top of the Big Ten standings, Aaron.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing as well is what we talked about in the preseason, looking ahead to the season that was, which is which teams are going to have the culture that can withstand all of the ups and downs and twists and turns that this season is going to and continue to throw at them. And what we're seeing right now is teams like Northwestern. We know what that culture is. We know what Pat Fitzgerald has instilled in that team. We knew who they were, and they've just built upon that, and they've relied on that as well. We're seeing teams whose culture we maybe weren't sure about, but we thought was on the upswing, and a team like Indiana, we're seeing that culture really come through and shine right now as well. So these are the teams that we have seen this season so far, who I think have probably looked at this as us against the world. You can only do that when you have a culture that's been built and established and something that your players believe in and believe in each other. And I think if you're Indiana, if you're Purdue, if you're Northwestern, you've got to be very, very encouraged, because regardless of how this season ends up for any of those teams, you've got to look at this year as being, hey, that was one that we just didn't let go. That wasn't, because it's going to have an asterisk by it no matter how it ends up. But it wasn't one that we just let go. It wasn't one that we just tried to go through the motions here. We really built upon something, and I think that's positive news for future seasons for the teams that you mentioned.
I meant when you look at Maryland, whose game against Ohio State, we just found out before we went on the air, that game's been canceled because of COVID cases. Clearly they were, and that's COVID cases at Maryland, so clearly they got a little celebratory with that rare blowout over Penn State. But if you look at Maryland and the way they've responded, you look at Northwestern, and you look at Indiana, something they all have in common right now. New quarterbacks or improved quarterbacks. Now, we saw Michael Penix last year for Indiana, and we liked what we saw. He just got hurt, and then Peyton Ramsey finished the season. Well, you saw Michael Penix just absolutely disembowel Don Brown's defense on Saturday, although it looks like pretty much everybody is going to do that this season. But still, he's impressive. We've been talking all offseason about what Peyton Ramsey could be for Northwestern, a stabilizer, a guy who's competent, who knows how to run a system. You know, their favorite play in the Northwestern offense is a check down. Peyton Ramsey's great at that. And he can use his feet to get first downs. That's a big thing for a Northwestern quarterback with their style of play. And you look at Tua's little brother. You know, after that rough opener against Northwestern, I mean, he has been putting up video game numbers the last couple of weeks. So here's why I point that out, because you start asking yourself how much of this is sustainable. Well, if you're getting quality play at the most important position on the field, like last year, Illinois had a surprise season, right? But they were second in the country in non-offensive touchdowns. That's not sustainable. If you're getting quality play at the most important position on the field, that's much more sustainable. But now let's look at the other end of the spectrum, right? To everything that there's a yin, there must be a yang. If indeed it's the year of the upstart, then that must mean it is a bad year for the Blue Bloods. And right now you have Penn State going from a preseason top 10 team to 0-3 for the first time in 20 years. Michigan with consecutive horrific losses. To a Michigan State team, they were a 25-point favorite at one point against. An Indiana team they haven't lost to since 1987. And now you've got Jim Harbaugh on the hot seat there. And then Nebraska off to a slow start again under Scott Frost. Somehow managed to score 13 meager points despite well over 400 yards of offense against Northwestern. That, folks, is tough to do. So some blue blood disappointment in the Big Ten this year, which is the result of a surge by the upstarts.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of this is the expectations are just so high at some of those programs that you just mentioned, maybe Nebraska notwithstanding, but the expectations are so high that it feels like once you've lost one game, the season is over. It could be a little bit of that, but it could just be, in Penn State's case, I mean, you lost so many guys. To the draft or just sitting this year out, opting out of this year, that it's hard to build much around that, especially when you were going to have a lot of pieces to replace anyway. When it comes to Michigan, now that is a case, I do believe, where the culture, if there is one, it's completely fallen apart. Jim Harbaugh needs to be fired. He needs to be out of there. I've texted my buddy Andrew, who's a Michigan fan as well, the last couple of weeks.
Shout out to Andrew.
Yeah, who is a Michigan fan, and I've told him don't even let him back on the bus. I mean, especially after the Michigan State. We didn't even get to talk about that because we weren't here last week. You come off a big win at Minnesota, or you just kick their teeth in. Michigan State is Rutgers slump buster. Little brother then goes and proceeds to run their mouth all week about the team down the road, and then you let him beat you. I mean, that's unacceptable. And then just getting manhandled by Indiana, even though the yards per play difference
was almost 2 yards.
In favor of like you said, in favor of Michigan. That is just a complete and systemic meltdown from that program. And at this point, how do you build back from that? I don't think you do. It's hard to. You're talking about 18 to 22-year-old men, young men, whatever you want to call them. They're not professionals, and you just can't build back from that. So that's the one program that I would be really concerned about. Penn State, not so much. And then Nebraska, I still think for some reason Scott Frost is in the mode of give him another year to prove what he can do in a normal, quote unquote, normal year. I still think there's a little bit of grace there for Scott Frost. But yeah, for the Blue Bloods, it's not been pretty all the way around.
Let's go next to Wisconsin. And, we talked a lot, as you mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago, we talked a lot this offseason about how much culture was going to be important this year. Because it's not just the lack of prep time. That's a major thing. So do you have an established identity as a program? Because you didn't have spring ball at any of these schools. But on top of that, following all the various COVID protocols and everything else. And I'll just guarantee, Aaron, that if you and I would have sat here at any point in May, June, or July, or when the Big Ten recanted and rebooted the season in September, and we would have said, who's the program that's going to screw the pooch for everybody else?
Rutgers.
We would have gone through 12, 13 names before we got to Wisconsin, right? I mean, who in our league has a more established identity and culture than they do? I mean, it goes back to the early 90s under Barry Alvarez, who's still there as the AD, shepherding the program from on high. And yet, they absolutely imploded. Up to 27 cases, both staff and players. I just would have never guessed that they would be the team that would upset the apple cart on the COVID front in a million years. As of right now, it appears the game against Michigan Saturday night is a go, although it looks like we're going to see several other high-profile teams not play this week because of COVID. I don't even know what to say about how they could not manage this there and almost risked their season as a result. Just not the team that we would have guessed would have screwed or wet the bed on this at all, Aaron.
Well, far be it for me to defend Wisconsin because I hate their guts, and I'm usually looking for a way to put them down.
As a jealous Iowa fan, to be honest.
I'm not jealous. I'm just stating the facts here. I'm jealous. But anyway, I'm looking for ways to put them down legitimately or otherwise. I don't think this is one of those things. The virus is just going to virus. Now, sure, there are some things that anybody can do during flu, cold season, what have you, to make sure you're not just being an idiot. Don't lick doorknobs. Not that anybody does that. I'm exaggerating.
I've got 27
here.
cases. I'm starting to wonder. Okay,
that's true. But the virus is going to virus, guys. I mean, what do you think is a great habitat for a virus like this? A kind of wet, maybe moist locker room area, or a football field in the middle of the summer. It's going to be a locker room. So any of these players, any of these teams, if somebody has the virus and they've got it pretty bad where it's actually detectable by these antigen tests, which are different, that's a whole nother box of worms. If they've got it that bad and they've been in close contact with a bunch of people or been in close quarters, it's just going to spread. And so I don't want to hold any team accountable for, well, you didn't manage a virus. It's a virus. I'm sorry, it's a virus. Most of the guys in these age ranges are not going to be in a very, very high category of risk for this virus, so I'm not really worried. So I can't really blame any team if it has an outbreak, bad or otherwise, for not managing it well, because I'm just in the camp of you can't control this thing at the end of the day. You can do things to take steps to make it better, and if you want to criticize them for not following that, if there's specific examples, then have at it. They knew the rules going into this, have at it. But I'm not going to criticize any team for having an outbreak.
This is the most positive test I've heard of at a team in the country. We've seen, 25, 30, 40 players out for programs. I think last week, Mississippi State barely had enough to barely add 40 scholarship players or 50 scholarship players. I've never heard, though, a lot of that is with contact tracing. I've never heard of 27 positive cases, though, in your program. Something to keep in mind. Right now, the rule in the Big Ten is you have to play at least 6 games to be eligible for the Big Ten championship should a majority of teams in the Big Ten play 6 games. Well, Ohio State now has 1 cancellation, so they can only play 7 games. So that's a little less margin for error for them. Well, Wisconsin had 2, which means they have to play this weekend against Michigan and then the rest of their games under the current rules in order to be eligible for the Big Ten championship game. Now, the number comes down if a majority of teams in our league can't get to 6 games, and then so it's like a curve in a class when you were in school back in the day. The curve will adjust accordingly. But this is a must-play situation for Wisconsin on Saturday night in Ann Arbor. Not sure about Graham Mertz. According to the protocols, he should be cleared to play Saturday night, but we don't have a clue. How much has he practiced? What's gone on there for the last few weeks? Who knows? But I just would have never guessed in a million years that Wisconsin would be the team doing whatever it can to play the minimum amount of games it's required in order to be eligible for the championship in the Big Ten. I would have picked somebody else. And now you start wondering, too, what we've talked about, these Blue Bloods whose seasons are effectively over from a season goal standpoint, particularly where Michigan and Penn State are concerned. You start wondering how many of those guys want to keep doing the antigen nasal swab every day. You know what I'm saying? Gonna want to, they missed the Halloween party, season, which I think is probably gone at some of these schools down south, frankly. How many more, nights out with the ladies or your buddies, if you're not going anywhere as a team, are you going to be disciplined and say, oh yeah, I'm going to stay home in my room? I think that's something to watch in our league moving forward as well. I don't even know what to say about Ohio State anymore. They're just so much better than everybody else that I don't know how to analyze them. I don't even know what would be like if I was like an Ohio State talk show host. I'd be analyzing backups and, what I thought they could do in 2 or 3 years. They're just so much better than everybody else. So you try to come up with unique ways to convey self-evident truth. This is one. This is one of the most incredible stats I have ever seen. All right. And this comes from Dave Revson over at the Big Ten Network. Ohio State quarterback Justin Fields right now has 9 touchdown passes this season, 7 incompletions. I couldn't do that on a video game. I mean, if I fired up the NCAA 2014, which was the last edition of that glorious game made, and put it on the easiest level and maxed out talent, I don't think I could go a 9-7 touchdown to incompletion ratio over 3 games. That's
can't.
incredible.
I've tried.
You tried to do it?
Yeah.
He did it. He did it in real life. He did it in real life. I mean, that is. What do you say to that?
Well, I said on Biggerton not too long ago that I still believe Trevor Lawrence would be the favorite for the Heisman. Well, now he's been out 2 games, and Justin Fields is putting up these numbers. And if he continues at this pace, then I think you got to give it to Justin Fields, despite Trevor Lawrence having a larger, probably at that time, sample size by the time that the award comes around. It's just incredible. It really is. And before the first game of the season when they took on Nebraska, I think that was on Fox, and Fox had a feature about how Justin Fields was a vegan now, I believe.
Yeah.
He's not eating meat, and I'm like, oh, no.
I don't love football that much.
Oh, no. Well, apparently maybe that's working for him.
He's soon to be the national spokesman for the vegan diet.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah. No wonder McDonald's came out with the Beyond the Meat thing alternative the other day. But when it comes to Ohio State, though, we should not overreact to one season one way or the other in terms of the Big Ten and its overall viability or overall standing in the college football universe. But this is becoming more and more apparent, Steve, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. Overall, don't you think it's becoming more like the ACC? Incredibly top heavy. There's more parity than the ACC.
Our middle class is better.
Our middle class is better, but especially with what's going on or not going on in Michigan. I don't know who else. I don't know who else is in Ohio State's stratosphere. Right now, I don't see it. And yes, we've seen the weird, I don't want to call them fluky blowouts the last couple of seasons of the Urban Meyer era where Iowa and Purdue respectively just blew the doors off of Ohio State. But man alive, in terms of the overall landscape, it's becoming a one-team league in terms of college football playoff potential.
Finally, this might be the weirdest play of all time. It is certainly in the conversation for the weirdest play in the history of our league. What you're watching here is you're watching Illinois punt from the 45-yard line. Here's what you don't know, though. Let me give you the Paul Harvey, or the 50-yard line. Let me give you the Paul Harvey rest of the story. See that at the bottom of the screen there, folks? It's 4th and goal. They're punting on 4th and goal from midfield. 4th and goal from midfield, Illinois punts. Have you ever seen anything like that before, Aaron?
This is like one of those record scratch, freeze frame, close-up of Lovie Smith. You may be wondering how I got here. This is, if you're 4th and goal from like the 48, 50, mid anywhere beyond the 20-yard line, you've made some serious mistakes in your life.
Yes.
And you need to do some reevaluation.
Reconsider your life
and
choices.
Soul searching.
Yes.
I mean, that's really hard to do. That's really difficult to do.
Hey, good punt. You pinned him down there. Yeah, great job. Yeah.
Well done. I don't know what to say about that. Yikes. Other than
4th
yikes.
and goal from midfield and a punt.
Yeah.
Somebody come up with a stat. How often has anybody punted on 4th and goal in the history of the Big Ten Conference? Well, you just saw it happen in real life, courtesy of your Illinois Fighting Illini. We'll come back, play this week's game of Big Ten Would You Rather next. Let's get to it. This week's game of Big Ten Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. Aaron, I will begin with one for you. Would you rather be Indiana or Northwestern right now? In other words, whose 3-0 start do you think is more sustainable?
If you would have asked me this maybe after 2-0, I might have said Indiana, but I think I'm going to say Northwestern right now. This year especially, you got to be, if you want to have any sort of aspirations of doing anything other than just getting to Champions Week and saying, hey, we did a season, guys. If you want to do anything other than that, you gotta pack a defense, and it's clear now Northwestern can definitely pack a defense, at least in the second half of games. And I think one of Nebraska. I was not able to watch the game. One of Nebraska's touchdowns was actually a pick six, wasn't it, or a long touchdown or long interception return. So Northwestern, you definitely want to have a defense, and if you can just dink and dunk, kill time, and then just make your opponent kill time before they throw another interception, Spencer Petras, or punt it away because, you've sacked them and taken them out of field, whatever. I'm taking Northwestern in that defense right now.
All right.
This next one is for you. Would you rather be James Franklin or Kirk Ferentz right now?
I'd rather be James Franklin because I've got Jim Harbaugh in my division. I mean, I could run the table this year in reverse. All the heat is on Jim Harbaugh. All the we talk last year. So much has been made about that stat about Jim Harbaugh on the road versus ranked teams. Remember we talked last year that James Franklin had the exact same stat.
Yep.
But no one ever knew, right? And so he's got to win over Ohio State. He's got a Big Ten championship ring. Jim Harbaugh doesn't have any of those things, and so you've got a full at least the end of this season. And then we see what happens between Michigan and Harbaugh. But you've at least got the end of this season where it's like your problems and troubles don't exist. On the other hand, Kirk Ferentz still has, there's headlines in our state today. Hey, we're going to get rid of the claim that, or the demand for $20 million, and we're just going to sue you in court instead, right? That story that has dogged Iowa all offseason with racial animus is not going away. So I'd rather be James Franklin right now. I think I'm dealing with a more forgiving public. This one is for you. Would you rather be Jim Harbaugh or Scott Frost? Meaning, which one has the better chance to turn it around at their respected alma maters?
Scott Frost. And I take no pleasure in saying this right in front of you.
Hey, I asked for it. I'm the one that asked the stupid ass question. So.
Just because I do Michigan podcast with you as well, or produce it. I think I know more than the average bear about Michigan football. Just from an outside observer, it's how can I say this? It's almost insulting. I'm not a Michigan fan.
Yeah,
it's
that's
insulting.
A good word.
To see what's going on.
That's an excellent word.
There.
I have been insulted the last couple of weeks. That game against Michigan State, given their talent level, what happened to them this offseason, the way they ran smack at us, and they punched us in the mouth. We never responded. That was insulting. And then to come out, listen, I've been high on Indiana this whole offseason, remember? When we had the original schedule, I'm like, I think they could be 8-0. But your season's on the line. Losing to them is not the thing. You never really put up a fight, man. I mean, you let them roll you. That, to me, I just found insulting. That's a great word. I'm insulted as a Michigan fan.
And as an outside observer as well, you see how much he's being paid for these results, and it's just like, you know what? If we're going to have you in the league, and if we're going to have you in the league, we want Michigan to matter, because a good Michigan is good for the Big Ten. A good Nebraska is good for the Big Ten. Having Ohio State where it is makes the Big Ten actually relevant. We'll just put it that way. And just have this. I mean, I would take what's your deal, Jim Harbaugh back right now. I would like to have some fire and some brimstone on that sideline, because at least it looks like you're trying. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like you're trying right now, and
it looks like Rich Kotite on the set, like the old Keith Olbermann, Dan Patrick Sports Centers, where they'd flash to Rich Kotite after another hapless Jets loss, and Keith Olbermann would say, "Rich Kotite, stoic." That's what it looks like right now. Yeah.
So it's insulting, and so I'd rather have Scott Frost right now. I think he's still got a little bit of spark in him right now, and we'll see if he can actually do anything with it, but I'd rather have Frost. Last one's for you. Would you rather have high expectations heading into a basketball season or come out of nowhere?
I guess I'd rather come out of nowhere, because the basketball offseason isn't typically like the football offseason, where that's a season unto itself. You know what I mean? Because when we're getting all hyped up about the football offseason, you've got a period of time there when spring traditionally ends, spring ball, and then fall camp begins. Unless your baseball team is really doing well, NBA finals maybe if it's a compelling matchup. Other than that, there's nothing else happening in sports other than one golf major a month, right? And so that period of time in June and July, when the football preview magazines are coming out, that's almost like another season, isn't it? I'd rather have the expectations of a season with that separate season and the fun of the speculation and everything else.
Sure.
Where basketball, because it takes place it starts in the middle of football season, just kind of sneaks up on you, right? And so I would rather have a team kind of come out of nowhere, because I don't need like an entire off season of hype to get me through to basketball season the way that a football season does.
Yep.
And I look at in the last decade, my team, we've gone to the national championship game twice. The first year in 2013, we had huge expectations that year. We had everybody coming back off a Big Ten championship team and bringing in the best class in the conference. And so there was all kinds of hype about that team with Trey Burke back and everything else. But that 2018 team was picked like 6th or 7th in the league. It was not ranked in anybody's poll at the beginning of the season. And it was a ton of fun just watching them develop and kind of sneak up on everybody. So I don't need the offseason hype for basketball as much as a fan as I need in June and July. I need because there's so much free time and speculation about W and L in the season. I need to dare to dream. Otherwise, it kind of takes that enjoyment of the speculation season away from me. Good stuff. We'll come back, wrap it up with our Twitter poll results, as well as our question of the week next. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked our audience, who's more likely to make a coaching change, Michigan, Iowa, or neither? 74.1% voted Michigan, 6.8% voted Iowa, 19% voted neither, and I'm just looking at this realizing I forgot to put a both option on there, my bad. So Aaron, your thoughts on those polling results, what do you think?
I think at this point, they're probably more likely, a lot more likely now than they were 2 or 3 months ago to make a coaching change. I think
who's
the
the
situation,
Michigan or Michigan and Iowa?
Both.
Okay.
I think Michigan, though, their situation is a lot more dire than it is at Iowa. You can at least maybe see some sort of path forward for Iowa, although I don't want to grant validity to what's gone down at Iowa at all. I just don't think a guy who already is who he is in Kirk Ferentz, who is not a spring chicken, who is probably going to retire in the next few years anyway, the chances of him being able to turn it around and salvage some sort of a legacy, very, very slim. But I do think the situation is more dire in Michigan. If I would have if I would have been able to vote for both, I probably would have voted for both.
Yeah, I think both probably would have won if I remember to put that option up there. But I like what you're saying. I mean, Iowa is a patient that is in critical condition right now.
Yeah.
Michigan is a patient that needs triage. It is bleeding out on a road side as we speak. So I hear you on that. All right, this week's question of the week comes from Eric Rupert. Is James Franklin the definition of fool's gold? Well, here's the thing. Franklin's done a good job there. I mean, he made a gutsy decision to go with a kind of unheralded recruit in Trace McSorley as a quarterback, hired an offensive coordinator nobody had ever heard of named Joe Moorhead, and revolutionized his program, and then having a generational talent in Saquon Barkley helped. So, he's got a Big Ten championship ring. He's got to win over Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh doesn't have any of those things. I think if anybody's fool's gold, unfortunately, and I hate to say this because he's one of my all-time favorite Wolverines, it's Jimmy. But I think this is a conversation. I wouldn't be shocked if you saw Michigan and Penn State just crater. Because those are two programs that have big expectations every year. They're not going to meet those expectations. They're out of the running for those expectations. And I think it becomes like when one of those two teams has to go to some kind of flea bag bowl. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Getting those guys with all the recruiting credentials and everything, and they're thinking the NFL, motivated to go play some know-nothing exhibition game in December, you're just like ripe for an upset in those situations, right? Like, Kentucky beat a disappointed Penn State team in the Citrus Bowl, which is actually a good bowl game. But that was not a game that Penn State team wanted to be in after back-to-back 11-win seasons a couple of years ago. You saw Michigan in 2017 lose to a bad South Carolina team in the Outback Bowl. The rest of the season for Michigan and Penn State is kind of those bowl games. You know what I mean? I mean, those guys, those championships are out of the question for both. I wouldn't be shocked if you saw one or both of those teams, therefore, crater the rest of the way. What is likely going to happen is this is the end of the Harbaugh era at Michigan. If that's the case, then I think next year we can better entertain this question because there will be much more scrutiny on James Franklin than there is right now because he gets to escape because, Jim Harbaugh is a coach right now with one of those red laser pointers on his head. And so anybody that's not named Jim Harbaugh right now, with the possible exception of your guy, because of the offseason they had, Aaron, anybody else in our league, though, not named Jim Harbaugh, is walking on sunshine right now.
Yeah, and it's the sad reality. For different reasons, it's the sad reality of where we are with those two situations. I just think Ferentz fatigue, at least among some of the Iowa fan base, has set in, and has set in for a long time. And to add this on top of that, and to look at what could be some fissures in the locker room, we don't know that for sure, but it certainly seems like that. If you look at their first couple of games, it just seems like a good time to move on. Let's put it that way. And with Michigan, it's just, you're not getting the job done, man. You're just not getting the job done. And you haven't, and you've had ample opportunity to do so. So time to move on.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of Bigger Ten. Reminder, we will not be here next week. I'm on vacation at Disney World unless Aaron decides to go solo, which I wholeheartedly endorse, but that will be your call. Otherwise, we will see you again in a couple of weeks. Who knows how many more games get canceled? Who else deserves to be fired? We'll have it all for you right here on Bigger Ten. Remember to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, share, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, however you access us, YouTube, each and every episode. Thanks to all of you. We appreciate your help helping us get the word out about what we do here each week on Bigger Ten. For Aaron McIntire, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next time.